I'm the incoming president of the Humanities and Social Sciences Federation of Canada, and on behalf of our president, Stephen Tube, will be with us tomorrow, and all our staff, and all the staff that surround BART to organize Congress 2016 in Calgary. A warmest welcome to the first in this series of events. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We're excited about the amazing preparations undertaken by our host, the University of Calgary, for this Congress Week, and we thank them for their hospitality. Je voudrais aussi vous dire que, pour des fins de traduction simultanée, nous avons un service semblable. Vous pouvez vous procurer des écouteurs dans la salle qui est située à l'extérieur du théâtre. You can have headphones if you do require them. Je souhaite remercier le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines du Canada, la Fondation canadienne de l'innovation et Université Canada pour leur parrainage de la série de conférences Voir grand. Thinking Big conferences are a big part of what we do at the Federation. They occur in Ottawa, they occur at Congress, and also in various parts across the land. You can see many of them on our website and also on YouTube if you do care to go there. I'd like to extend an additional thanks to today's big thinking sponsor, the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. Big Thinking series gives us a chance to engage in conversations about the pressing issues of our time. And today is no exception. Nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir le maire de Calgary et un ami de la ville de Québec, where I come from, His Worship Naheed Nenshi, who will, no doubt, engage us as he discusses the power of people to make change in their communities. Je voudrais maintenant inviter Pierre Normand, vice-président aux relations extérieures et aux communications de la Fondation canadienne de l'innovation, pour présenter le maire Nenshi. Monsieur Normand.
Merci beaucoup, Guy. Bonjour à tous. C'est toujours un très grand plaisir d'être ici alors que nous nous apprêtons à inaugurer une nouvelle série de conférences Voir grand dans le cadre du Congrès des sciences humaines. The Canada Foundation for Innovation has helped to support this very important event for many years. And that's because we appreciate the power of ideas and research to help address the big issues of our time. But it's also because thinking big is one of the ideals upon which the CFI was first created. As many of you know, the Canada Foundation for Innovation funds research infrastructure. And of course, research infrastructure can be things like DNA sequencers and telescopes. But it's also computer equipment used to unlock patterns of language in vast amounts of historical documents. It's research spaces used to develop new insights into how we educate the next generation. Ou encore, ce sont des équipements pour colliger des données qui nous permettent de comprendre l'engagement des jeunes dans nos institutions démocratiques ou l'assimilation des réfugiés dans la société canadienne. In short, the CFI gives researchers like you the tools you need to think big and to innovate. And this series of conferences reflects those values. It's also, I must say, such a pleasure to be here today to introduce Mayor Nenshi, and especially on the theme of leadership, community, and resiliency. Even from afar, it is easy to see how this city, and indeed this whole province, defines itself on the idea of resiliency. The terrible fires in Fort McMurray makes this a very timely conversation. Observing how places like the city of Calgary have helped Fort McMurray's evacuees is a clear demonstration of how resiliency depends on both leadership and community. Et c'est d'ailleurs avec plaisir que nous anticipons le propos de Monsieur le maire à ce sujet. There are, of course, countless elements to creating a community, and knowledge and research is one of them. In fact, at the Canada Foundation for Innovation, We often say research builds communities. We believe that research infrastructure is at its best when it helps mobilize a community to help us understand how we relate to each other, to strengthen our society, or create a healthy economy. And I must say, Mayor Nenshi is really at the heart of all this. Of course, he needs very little introduction, but it's worth noting that he was Canada's first tenured professor in the field of nonprofit management at Mount Royal University. He's also received many honors, including being named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum and receiving the President's Award from the Canadian Institute of Planners and the Humanitarian Award from the Canadian Psychological Association for his contributions to community mental health. À la suite des inondations de 2013, le magazine Maclean's l'a nommé la seconde personne la plus influente au Canada après le Premier ministre. And in 2014, the UK-based City Mayors Foundation called him the best mayor in the world. Mesdames et messieurs, accueillons ensemble le maire de Calgary, His Worship, Naheed Nenshi.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Merci Pierre, c'est mon grand plaisir de vous accueillir ici à Calgary et ici à mon université, l'Université de Calgary. It's an enormous pleasure for me to have all of you here at my university, at the University of Calgary, celebrating our 50th anniversary this year of making great change in the community. I always say that the University of Calgary is not just the University of Calgary, it is the University for Calgary. And it is a great pleasure for me to be here at the magnificent Rosé Center with all of you today. I'm an old hand at Congress, and when they asked me if I would deliver this lecture, I said, wait a minute. So you're asking a professor if he will give the keynote lecture at Congress when he usually has to fight to get a poster presentation because his research is so uninteresting. Oh yeah, I'll take that. It really is great to see all of you here today. And let me begin, as I always begin, by saying to all of you, qu'il. Blackfoot is a very difficult language. But in the Blackfoot language, it means greetings to all my relations. And I love that sentiment. I love that sentiment that talks about how in community we are all entwined, that we are together in a web of relationships with one another. You're standing here today, as you heard, on very ancient land. We do not live in this country or in this city on new land newly populated. But in fact, we live on land where for thousands of years, people have been meeting at the banks of these two great rivers in this place called Mokinstus, the Elbow, to hunt and trade and fish, to live and love, to have great victories, to taste bitter disappointments, to tell stories, and above all, to build community. The original inhabitants of this land were called the Nitsitapi, the people. Today we call them the Blackfoot people. And over the millennia, they were joined by people from many other nations. From the north, the Beaver people, the Tsuut'ina people. From the east, the Stoney people, the Nakota people. And after that, waves and waves and waves of people from every nation in every corner of the world. And in 1877, a few years before Calgary became a town, at a place just east of here called Blackfoot Crossing, representatives of those nations came together. They came together to discuss how we share this land. They came together to discuss how we welcome newcomers to our community. And together they made treaty. And that treaty you've heard about, Treaty 7, I call it the origin story of our community, because it really does talk about how we live together as a community with people from all over the world, how we walk hand in hand with the Métis people and the Indigenous people and all of us to create a more prosperous future. And for me, that is an important part of building community. And I should say that, of course, at this time, all of our thoughts are with the people of Treaty 8, the Athabasca people. North of here, the people of Wood Buffalo, Fort McMurray, Fort McKay, Fort Chipewyan, who are now experiencing a terrible crisis, but also experiencing what we're going to talk about a little bit today, the very best of community. And for me, that is a very powerful thing, and it what makes our community continue to work together. And by the way, I want to say to all of you, thank you for being nice to the evacuees. Because one of the things that I've had to deal with over the last few weeks is the evacuees, many people, it's our honor and our pride and our privilege to look after some people. But many of them I know are staying here on campus. And there was a bit of a sweat when we went, there's all these academics coming, and they need the dorm rooms. Thank you for being flexible. It means a lot. And it really is about resilience. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about this concept of resilience in a number of different ways. And I should preface this by saying that, as you heard and as I mentioned, I too am an academic. Now, I teach in the business school, so I know some of you will go, well, that's not really an academic, but you know. I have to keep reminding the folks at Mount Royal University just down the street from here that I'm just on leave, so I'm allowed to still say I'm a professor at Mount Royal University. It expires January 4th, 2018, by the way, which is my colleague, Professor Douglas MacDonald, who's here with me's birthday. And so I said his greatest birthday gift will be I will be back at work with him. He keeps saying he doesn't want that birthday gift. But I've been very lucky in my career because I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, that's my academic field, and now I find myself in the public sector with extraordinarily dedicated public servants working every day. And I think that gives me a little bit of a perspective. And you know, originally when I was asked to give this speech, I said, great, I'm going to give them a 30-minute lecture on how the real world really works. Time to get out of the ivory tower, and then I go, oh, they'll really enjoy that. There may be some undercurrents of that in what I talk about, but I do want to talk about how, as we are in a position where we have the ability to help make decisions that really impacts people's lives, that it is important for us to balance off the very best thinking and the very best knowledge with the reality of how people live. Because as you all know, our world as academics isn't really how people live. I was talking to a group. What's the correct collective noun for university presidents? A murder of university presidents. That might be it. A couple of years ago, and I remember getting a strange question about the future role of the university in the community, and I remember saying something that I thought was very clever at the time. I still think it's very clever, which is why I'm going to repeat it. Which was, you know, the weirdest thing about universities is that they are run by the tiny minority of people who never left. Everybody else leaves. So we have a certain responsibility with our research, with our scholarship, and with our teaching to ensure that when people leave, they know what they're doing. And it is a very difficult responsibility, but one that I take very, very seriously, and I hope that you do as well. On this topic of resilience, this week, Calgary was named, along with Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal was already on the list, as one of the 100 resilient cities of the world. It's quite a big deal that 4 Canadian cities have found themselves on that list. It's a program of the Clinton Global Initiative and the Rockefeller Foundation to get these 100 cities together so they can share their knowledge about resilience and resiliency with the rest of the world. And according to the Rockefeller Foundation's initiative, urban resilience, I'm just reading you a quote here, urban resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kind of chronic stresses and acute shocks that they experience. So this idea about being agile, being able to take any stress and to apply it to a solution is very, very important when we think about communities. It's also sometimes important when you think about department faculty meetings, but let's not talk about that too much because you're at Congress and you don't have to think about that. This lecture is supposed to be about big ideas and big thinking. I'm just a politician who happens to be a business prof. I'm not sure I have any big ideas. But I think that it is important for us to think about how big ideas work in the context of how people live in our community. So for example, tomorrow's keynote speaker, I'm sure, will spend a lot of time talking about the LEAP Manifesto. The LEAP Manifesto is the epitome of a big idea. But is it an idea that allows us to be able to manage how people live? And is that something we actually want to do? Is it, in short, an idea that acknowledges resilience, that acknowledges resilience of people? And I suspect during the Q&A we can talk a fair bit more about that, and I'm very happy to talk a fair bit more about that. But I do want to tell you that my experience as someone who works in community every day, who works with citizens every day, not just as a legislator, is that you got to work hard to turn big ideas into real actions. Because big ideas sometimes can be dangerous if they live only at the level of big idea. We got to think hard about what it means for people in their real lives, and it means you have to be agile, you have to be adaptable, you have to understand human cost and human impact. You have to be always fostering a resilient community that can accommodate change. And I will tell you, I won't go on and on and on about this, but I will tell you that when we look at the LEAP Manifesto as an example, I agree with my premier on this one, that it sees the core issues of climate change and energy policy as binary. In fact, the topic of tomorrow's Big Ideas lecture is capitalism versus the climate. I don't know if I get that. And in fact, I know I don't get that, because I believe that we have to adapt to reality. And yes, we're moving to a low-carbon future, of course we are. But there's still a role for business. There's still a role for carbon. There's still a role for people to make a decent living, to provide a dignified life for themselves and their families. And our future is about renewable, and it's about non-renewable. It's about not begrudging our patrimony and not begrudging what we have here, our resources, human and physical, that we should be extraordinarily proud of, that we should be working hard to use to bring good to the world. It means about building resiliency among our people for climate. It means building resiliency within our economy, and we have not done a great job of that. But it also means not begrudging the fact that we have ability to provide safe, clean, reliable, green energy, not only to our own citizens, but to people around the world. Did I say I wasn't going to go on and on about this? I'll go on for just another moment, which is, that does mean taking advantage of what we've got. It means making hay while the sun shines, to use a good Alberta phraseology for you. But it also means building and future-proofing our communities and our future generations. And I think that's something that we need to talk about a lot more in our community. And in order to do that, I think we have to rely upon the strongest resource we've got. And the strongest resource we've got is us. It's our people. You know, at this point in the economic cycle, people always say Calgary's in terrible shape, and I say, well, you know, it's certainly true that our unemployment rate has hit just above the national average. It's certainly true that a lot of our neighbors are in a lot of pain here. But it is also true that we remain in this country and in this city one of the most prosperous places on earth. We are one of the most educated places on earth. And if we can't set aside our partisanship and our differences and figure out solutions together, then I'm not sure anyone in the world can. The good news is, I know we can.
So please present yourself to the mics, identify yourselves, short, precise questions to the mayor, and we try to do whatever we can.
And I will provide short, precise answers. No, I won't.
Sandra Hobbs from Kelowna.
Hi.
A friend of mine was in Chennai last fall, and they had huge floods. And it seemed as though the people organized themselves in spite of the government. Do you think this is a healthy model?
No. I think what we need to do is have government take the lead in many, many ways, but the concept of self-organization, which is what you saw there, is tremendously important because I couldn't do that. I don't have enough public servants to do that. And certainly, the reason that it was so important to have those tens of thousands of people make a difference. By the way, that was the shortest, best question I've ever heard from an academic. Way to go. It wasn't just... Now it makes sense. I'm going to let you in on a little secret, and this is going to be tremendously important for Fort McMurray. It wasn't just to get the work done. It made a big difference to clean out people's homes and so on much quicker than we would have been able to do it otherwise. But the most important thing about that self-organization of citizens is that was actually a tremendously powerful mental health intervention. Because when people have lost everything, when they are in a sense of utter desperation, when they think it's the worst time of their lives, the most important thing is to remind them they live in a community where people care about them. That's why we have people from Fort McMurray living on a university campus. We could have put them in hotels, but we wanted to build community and make sure that they had a sense that people together are looking after one another, and that's what really matters. And government can start that. This number 3 that I wear very briefly is about a social movement called 3 Things for Calgary. It's about encouraging every citizen every year to do 3 things for the community. By the way, my big dream for the sesquicentennial of Canada is that I get to say the word sesquicentennial many, many times. The 150th birthday is that each of us give a gift to Canada, give a gift to our nation. 3 gifts, actually. That every citizen do 3 things for the community next year. So 3 things for Canada, help me make it happen. But that's why we do it.
So we'll take 2 more at least, this one and this one, please.
So at the beginning of your presentation...
And your name?
My name is Brooke Struck. I'm from Montreal. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that you want to reject this polarization between the economy and the environment or the climate. But I hope you would agree that the present look and feel of our economy is not very well aligned with the environmental and climate goals that we have. And also that we seem to be, in the Western world, feeling that established interests are much, much more entrenched than they've been, say, in the middle of the 20th century. So it's harder and harder to displace those interests. How do we grapple with these 3 things altogether? The fact that the economy and the environment don't have to be a polarization, but that the economy as it presently stands isn't very in line with our environmental goals, and that the present look and feel of the economy is going to be really hard to displace because of entrenched interests.
That is a beautiful set of questions, and I thank you for them, and I was really hoping that we could get into a bit of a dialogue about this. I'm going to reject one assumption you're making, the very last one. There are always entrenched interests, and it is the easiest thing in the world for someone who is losing an argument to say, I'm losing the argument because of the entrenched interests on the other side.
Am I losing the argument now?
Not yet. Tomorrow you may have a little more of that. Anyway, so be careful of that is all I'm saying. Because there's just as many entrenched interests on the other side. It's just those entrenched interests think that they are on the side of the angels, but they're also entrenched interests. And so that's what happened to Keystone XL. You know, a 1-meter wide pipe that would have had no impact, according to every scientific study, on climate change was made to bear all the sins of the carbon economy. If that's not an entrenched interest, I don't know what it is. But that said, you're right, but we also have to live in a world where, for better or worse, we as Canadians have these natural resources that we are currently selling to the world at a 50% discount. We're begrudging ourselves. Why in the world would we take a resource that we uniquely have and agree to sell it at a big discount when we also think it has the potential to do harm in the world? It's ridiculous. And what we've done is we've created a situation where for our most important export, we have only one customer, the United States. And thanks to technology that we developed right here in Canada, here at the University of Calgary in some ways, our number 1 customer has become our number 1 competitor. So we're in a tough situation. When you layer that, so that's just a straight up business professor talking to you about a supply chain problem in the economy that is leading to a magnificently large loss of prosperity across our country. Do you know that if we were simply getting world price, $50 today, for crude, then the federal and provincial governments would have no deficits in this country, as long as they could manage their spending, because it would actually close the revenue gap. It's that big a deal. And if you don't, and I believe that not having a bunch of debt is actually a very good thing to not leave for our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren. We all know that we're moving to a low-carbon world. We all know, we don't know when, we know that either our grandchildren or our grandchildren's grandchildren will say to us, "You burned that stuff?" But in the meantime, and that's your first two questions, right? As we are working our way... No, we're going to take her too.
No,
then we'll
of course
stop.
we will.
As we are working our way through this transition, and we know it's a transition, the manifesto will tell you, make a leap. Others will say, make a transition. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the responsible thing to do? What's the ethical and moral thing to do from an environmental perspective, from a public policy perspective, and from an economic perspective? And I would argue to you that the right thing to do when you have an asset that you know will decline in value over time is turn that asset into something that's valuable now. Turn that asset into education, into infrastructure, and turn it into money in the bank the way they have done in Norway. And I think that that is an incredibly important thing for us to do, and I think that conversations like the LEAP Manifesto don't get us there. And that's really my concern, is that as we're moving there, we have to think of the hundreds of thousands of people whose livelihoods are tied up in this, but we also have to think about the legacy we're creating in the long term. And that is, yes, an environmental legacy that is unspeakably important, but it is also a financial legacy that we've got to leave for our grandkids.
Madame, à vous la parole.
Thank you so much for taking my question. My name is Bonnie Larson. I'm a medical anthropologist and family physician working with our homeless population in Calgary. Inspiring speech today, Mayor Nenshi. Thank you so much. My question for you is, I've seen you speak about these amazing community responses to acute crises in our communities. And so I'm wondering, and I know that as a community, we are so capable of this type of response. Wondering, what is the way forward in terms of responding to our chronic crisis of homelessness and access to healthcare for our homeless population here in Calgary?
I wish I knew. But first of all, let me say to you, thank you for the work you do, because that is an important part of the response. It's an important part of the response that people of great skill like yourself work on the front lines every day to make a difference, and you're a hero in my book, so thank you for that. But you're right. In a country of this kind of wealth, the fact that we tolerate poverty and that we tolerate homelessness among our neighbors is a grave injustice, an extraordinary injustice. And so I can give you the technical answers. Here in Calgary, we have a poverty reduction strategy called Enough for All, which I'm very proud of. And the title is a double entendre. There are enough resources in our community that everyone should have enough, but it also is that we are spending enough time and effort within the poverty sector that we should be able to have better outcomes and better returns. All of that said, as I said, if I were still an academic, this is what I would be spending forever on. Sorry, Mount Royal University, still an academic. We got to get these questions into people's hearts and minds. We have to understand that the issue of homelessness in our city is an invisible flood. It's a flood that happens every single day. And it's not enough, it's good, but it's not enough to say, well, I'm going to volunteer at the drop-in center and make meals once a week. It's great, and do it, please do it. But we have to understand systemically that we have to live in a society where everyone has a decent place to live. And those decent places to live will take different forms, but we have to understand that the lack of that decent place to live is the root cause of so many other issues around addiction and mental health and all kinds of other things. It's not a symptom of it, it's a root cause. And getting our head around that and figuring out how to do that is a challenge that we all face. I think that our new provincial and federal governments understand that in a different way than the previous ones did, and are perhaps more aligned with the kind of work that's going on in every big city in this country. So I remain extremely optimistic. But I have to be because I'm the mayor. It's an intractable problem, but I think we can solve it together with goodwill and good minds.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take
One last question.
Michel Chamy, now from Ottawa, but I was a citizen of Calgary in June of 2013, and just very briefly because of everything you did at that time, sir, I just want to say thanks.
Thank you.
With your permission, I will end with a story that deals with homelessness.
Sure.
I have children, and they're sad at times. And once I told one of my sons, "Are you warm?" "Yes, I'm warm." Is it raining above your head?" "It's not raining above your head." "Then this is it. This is sanctified kindness," was the word last night by one of the leaders of your Aboriginal communities. And the language of humanism that you employed today is a great dynamics for the Congress that we will have. And on behalf of the Federation, I'm glad to give you this small token of
thank
our
you very much.
appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
all. Have a wonderful conference.